Stand by. We're going live. We're going live. 10, 9, going live. 8, 7, 6, 5, going live. 4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to 10 Seconds to Air. I'm Alita Guillen. You cannot be a great business leader without being a great communicator. My guest today is one of the most successful female CEOs in the country and has some very forward-thinking ideas about how the art of storytelling is one of the most important aspects of business management. Jill Layfield is the CEO of James Michelle Jewelry. She also co-founded with Jimmy Choo co-founder Tamara Mellon the luxury footwear direct-to-consumer brand Tamara Mellon. Before that, Jill was president and CEO of Backcountry-dot-com, where she grew the company from $25 million to $515 million in revenue and successfully sold the business for $350 million. Jill is also lead independent director of LivePerson, a conversational AI company, and sits on the board of the Orvis Company. Jill's path to the top of the boardroom was not conventional. Jill did not go to business school. Instead, she leaned on her background in communications to inform a new leadership style and drive direct connections with consumers. She has said that storytelling is one of the keys of her success. Joining me now in person is Jill Layfield. Hi, Jill.
Hello.
All right. Well, thank you for coming in person. You have had an incredible career and still going. I love the jewelry line. You have led thousands of employees, drawn in millions of customers, led the sale of at least one multi-million-dollar company, and you say that the art of storytelling is one of the keys to success. So I'm so curious, what goes through your mind 10 seconds before air or before one of these big meetings?
I really had to think about this, and, you know, I think this is something that I've only recently learned in like the last 5 years of my career, and that is that no one moment, no, one speech or meeting means more than sort of the collection of all of the moments in your life. And really, it's about context for me. I think about two things. I just heard an airplane in the distance, and I always think about how little everything looks when you're up in the air and you look down, you realize you're just this speck in a huge world. And then secondly, related to sort of context is that there's something like, I had to Google this, there's something like if you lived at, let's say, 80 years old, there's like 700,000 hours in your life, right? And so, like, again, any one moment, any 1 hour, it doesn't matter as much as you ever think it does in that moment. And if you sort of ground yourself in that right before you have to do something, it takes all of the fear and anxiety out of it, because you realize, again, that, your life is about the collection of so many things, not any one moment.
So you don't think of anything particular in that one moment, but let's go to the collection of it then. So what are you hoping in the collection of all those moments? What's the common thread?
Well, I'm hoping that, what I do and how I show up in my life, endears sort of people to respect me and like me. I mean, I once remember getting a question of like, would you rather be liked or respected as a leader? And I was like, well, I kind of don't want to give up on either, right?
Yeah.
I want both.
Right.
I don't think it's enough to be, the smartest person in the room or the person that's achieved the most. I think that's like important that you have something to say and that you're contributing. But if you're not like a good person and you're not leaving people remembering you as someone that they'd like to spend more time with, and I think you sort of have missed the point of life. So that's what I want. I want all those moments and all the work I do and in my personal life, to leave those around me respecting me and liking me.
How do you go about achieving that?
Yeah, so I think from a respect perspective, it's doing work. And contributing to whatever it is that you're building or a conversation that you're having. I think it requires, an open mind and a mentality of being a learn-it-all, not a know-it-all. And so with that comes a certain amount of humility, right? Because no matter how much you prepare and you study to gain the respect of others, you also have to remain humble that you don't have all the answers, or you don't have all the information. So I think if you can contribute, but at the same time stay humble, I think that's a way to gain respect. And then I think that dovetails very nicely into people liking you, because, again, if you have something, if you enrich somebody with some information or some knowledge or a point of view, I think it makes the person you're spending time with or the group that you're leading, sort of feeling like it's been time well spent. But if you're doing all of that with a healthy dose of humility, then, I think you're making that person feel like they also had a reason to be there. I'm not part of that company you're building or that conversation you're having.
You've had how many employees over the course of your career? Any idea?
Maybe like a couple thousand.
Yeah.
Yeah, roughly.
and you must have run into some people that you, I was going to say you haven't liked, true, but that maybe have not liked you.
Yep.
What do you do?
Yeah, I mean, I hate to think of that as happening, but it for sure has. It's sort of like what I said a minute ago, which was about the 700,000, hours of your life. Like, okay, so the 2,000 people, right? If there are a handful of people that don't like you, then you kind of got to move past it and say, but if there's, 1,500 that do and 500 that don't, well, I'm winning, the numbers are on my side.
Right.
And, just sort of, I do think you need to step back and ask yourself, well, why don't they like me? And what can I take from that to ensure that the next 500 people I meet, the majority come away with a good impression? Because there are definitely, I can think back in my career to people that have been unhappy with me or not liked working with me. And I am very aware of some of the things that I didn't do well previously that I've worked on. And by the way, I think those things that you work on, you never solve them and just like put them away and say, that's good, I don't have to think about it. But I think you can make improvements.
Yeah. So which brings me to sort of, you're talking about that kind of whole story over a lifespan. Storytelling is really important to you. You've talked about it before. You were a communications major, not a business major. How is storytelling, how does it show up in your work? Because you have a very unconventional, it would be one thing if you were always talking, but you're online, you have an online business. How is storytelling part of your work?
So I'm going to answer it in sort of two ways. So first is how it shows up, I would say, customer facing and in the brand building. And then I'll touch on sort of how it shows up in leadership. So from a brand building perspective, I think because I've always worked for companies that either were retailers selling things that other people make. That was the case at Backcountry, at least in the early days. So we sold North Face and Patagonia and Marmot. So it's either been as a retailer or as a brand, in this case now jewelry, where, it's really, really hard to think, well, why does this retailer or this brand exist, right? How is it differentiated? I'm like obsessed with that. I'm obsessed with this idea of like, why does something exist and, how is it differentiated? Why does the customer need this? Why can't she or he get it anywhere else? And so rarely does it come down to just absolutely the product attributes. It comes down to the story you wrap the product around and the way you make the customer feel, from the moment she discovers the brand or the product through to receiving the product and using the product. So I'll talk about that at Backcountry. When I joined Backcountry, I was an outdoor person, I'll put that in quotes, but I wasn't the most like hardcore outdoor, consumer. But sort of, living in that brand every day, I fell more and more in love with this idea of, people that use outdoor gear and spend a life outside, I just think have a better life. What you get from being outside, I think it allows you to live your best life. And so that was inspiring to me. And I thought to myself, well, the way you sell a North Face jacket or, a pair of Solomon skis when the customer can go get it direct from the brand or from REI or, any number of outdoor retailers is by romanticizing what I just said, right? That idea that when you get the right piece of gear, it's going to allow you to get outside and experience life to the fullest. And that was sort of the big unlock for storytelling for me. It was a way to compete and to acquire customers when, arguably you don't have differentiation in just the core product itself. You have to wrap something more around it. And that's, at the end of the day, I think what marketing does, is it brings an audience into a world and into a life. And that storytelling is, I think, what drives conversion. Maybe it would be different. I don't know, because I haven't worked in a business where the product is so unique. All you have to say is, look, you can't get this anywhere else.
Right.
Buy it here.
Right.
But I've always, again, had to think about how to, win the customer's attention. And the methodology that I sort of, realized was the big unlock was this idea of storytelling.
So what was the story with Backcountry?
The story was one, this idea that, the right gear, and we called our products gear largely, would allow you to live a full and exciting life outdoors. However, the sort of big story, I guess, that we leaned on was, you need some expertise to figure out what gear you need for what situations you're going to be in outdoors. And Backcountry had been created by two founders who locked on this idea of hiring what we called gearheads to provide service and support and content to our customers. And so it was really this idea of having gearheads be connected to customers and sort of telling that story and creating that narrative around a very specific consumer, a very specific, use case, and then the right gear. And that was the story. The story was, yeah, you need great gear to live a great life outside, but, there needs to be a connection between the gear for the situation for that customer. And that was what was then differentiated, was this idea of expert gearhead connections.
Yeah. And now you wanted to say storytelling as far as leadership goes.
Yes. So, and this is maybe something I'm like, I feel like I honed, I worked on at Backcountry. And maybe by the time I got to Tamara Mellon, I realized, that I was getting a bit better at it. And I realized how important it was. And that is this idea that to motivate a small or a large group of employees, you've got to tell a story about what's possible and where the business is headed and how you're going to get there. And in a business, inevitably, there's a lot of things going on, and the ability to sort of take complexity and put it together in something that's really easy to articulate and really easy for other people to follow is incredibly important in inspiring employees and then executing on that vision. So you're a storyteller as a leader.
Yeah,
and
for
sometimes,
sure.
by the way, you're telling a story that you may not even fully have figured out, or, the story may morph as you sort of get in and sort of execute the business. But, you will leave an organization behind and they will be paralyzed by what to do and what to focus on if you can't, as a leader, tell that story.
And did you realize that at Backcountry, or did you realize that because you came out with a communications degree? What point in your career did you say storytelling, this is it?
I guess it was learning by fire. It wasn't coming out of school with like a degree and being like, okay, now I can go tell a story as a leader and build a company.
Not that easy, huh?
No, it was probably developed in the process of selling Backcountry, because that's your ultimate storytelling moment as a business leader, outside of motivating your employees and communicating a vision and a plan. Because you've got to basically take, and this is what I felt, it felt like taking, 20 years of work by our founders who had left the company at some point and turned it over to me, and 11 years of me being at the business and putting all that heart, all that soul, all that work into, let's call it an hour presentation to convince somebody to pay a lot of money for a business,
Right.
And you're talking to people, by the way, that think in Excel and think in spreadsheets, and it's all about the numbers, right? You're all about what the spreadsheet spits out, but you also, at the same time, because you're looking for a premium to be paid for that business, you got to paint a picture of how incredible it is, the business you build. And that's why the numbers look good or, almost good.
Yeah.
And then you've got to paint a story of like how much unlock there is, right? What the potential is. If you buy this business, it can get to X because of all the things to build upon and all the things that we haven't even tackled yet as a growth opportunity. So, you got to get really crisp. And I remember when we were pitching Backcountry to potential buyers, and I think we did like 12 presentations. Like the first 2 are a little rough. I was like, I rambled. I'm like, what was my point there?
Right.
But by the last few, I was like, I could tell this story. And so it's learning on the job. Like anything. Yeah. I just had to practice and practice until I got better. And by the time I got to Tamara Mellon and we raised capital there, venture capital, a lot of venture capital, it's the same sort of thing. When you're walking into a room with a bunch of investors and you're asking for, let's say, $10, $20 million, you got to tell a story in a very compelling, crisp, it's like qualitative and quantitative data, heart and mind way to get people to write a check. And so again, and I just honed it there. I got a bit better at it, I guess.
Yeah. So I would say you are a very good storyteller. Yes. Can we sum it up like that?
I don't know. I'm getting there. I'm better than I was 20 years ago. That's for sure.
Right. So one of the other attributes that you talked about in other interviews, for your success is emotional intelligence. You talk about how important it is to have emotional intelligence. What do you mean by that?
I mean, understanding that, people are wired differently, understanding the subtle cues from the people that you work with, and then having the capacity to alter your response to get the best, sort of outcome out of that situation or that conversation. It's reading the signals and it's responding on just a more emotional and less sort of quantifiable or attribute sort of driven way of analyzing, a situation or an employee. So yeah, it's I mentioned a minute ago, and I think about this in storytelling, you've got to, I always like to say, you got to capture a customer with their heart and their mind, right? It's got to logically make sense to them, like why they would buy something from you. But they also got to fall in love with it.
Right.
And I think it's the same with like how you manage employees. There's a certain amount that's very like logical, it's compensation and it's maybe the benefits and it's the description of the role they're in. And it's very sort of like intellectual or cerebral, but then there's just an emotional part to who people are. And by the way, some people are 80%, heart and 20% mind. And some people that you work with are, 80% all logic and mind and 20% emotional. But emotional intelligence is actually being able to understand that and then manage that person based on how they're wired and the ability for you to be flexible in those situations.
Is that something that you learned on the job?
No, I think I will say this just because I think, when you're married, your spouse, they get a pretty good read of who you are. And my spouse will say, my husband will say, this is just your superpower. This is just like something that you were born with. And if anything, maybe it's compensated for other areas where I'm not strong. I think I just am a naturally sort of empathetic, and emotionally in tune person. And by the way, sometimes, I've got to like check that and make sure that that doesn't overwhelm the situation. I don't like read too much emotion into a situation, but on the plus side, it's equipped me to have the patience and the maybe aptitude to, have like, I think a high EQ.
And do you find that is common in the workplace?
Not necessarily.
No, doesn't sound like it. Okay.
No, I feel like I meet a lot of people who are very, very, very smart. A lot of people smarter than me, like, hands down. And just, man, sometimes I'm in a room with a group of people and I'm like, wow, like how'd their brain get there so fast? And I just, they got a big brain. But it's very rare that I actually think to myself, wow, that person really handled that situation delicately or intelligently from an emotional intelligence perspective. So I think it's rarer, frankly. And I think a lot of that is because the emphasis is put on IQ. I think it's also because, I mean, there's just a lot more men that I've worked with in business, and there's men that I think have amazing EQ, but more so I see men show up with a focus on what they know, not how they are going to treat people or treat a situation. So for those reasons, I think, I don't see high EQ as much as I see high IQ.
Do you think it's something that people could learn?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. But, people have to be comfortable spending time in that sort of uncomfortable space. It's like we've called at times, management teams, we've talked about like the sweat lodge, kumbaya sessions where we share our feelings, and they're always like a bit awkward and the weird facilitator. And, but you kind of got to like embrace those situations and that kind of training just as much as we go to school, right, to learn business or communications. We got to go to school, whatever that means, for how to treat one another and how to deal with conflict and how to listen.
Yeah.
And, really think deeply, not about how just to solve problems, business problems, but how to solve people problems.
Do you think that's changed over the years?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think without a doubt, whether it's macro emphasis on, mental health or interpersonal communications and just self, awareness and self-growth, I think there's definitely, been improvements. It's got to feel very different than, say, in the 60s and 70s.
Right,
I don't think you would have walked into corporate America.
Sure.
It's funny. I mean, there's companies like, oh my gosh, I think it's called Better Up or something, but there's huge companies now being built around mental health as an example. And I think, emotional intelligence is a part of mental health in a way, right? Because you're dealing often when you're using, I think, EQ with, honoring, respecting, and developing someone's, emotional and sort of, emotional health as well as your own. Because, so yes, I definitely think we're seeing an investment in the idea of EQ.
I'm curious to know, as far as storytelling or communication goes, and then this EQ, what the different generations bring. So when you interview people, you're smiling like, yeah. Is there an obvious layer of any of this with certain groups?
Well, 100%, because everybody would say, I don't think I'd be alone in this, that, whether it's the like millennials or the next generation of, I can't remember what it's called after millennials, but my daughters would remind me. But anyways, is, it's very unfair. Millennials are entitled, or they're lazy, or they're emotional. There are all these, and I feel so bad because I actually like millennials and one generation down, are, the most important, frankly, generations for me right now building brands, because they got the pulse on the zeitgeist, right? And they're creative and they've got energy, and so I have such respect for those generations. But so to your point on are we seeing an evolution here in EQ? Well, for sure, because they show up with a lot more needs, emotional needs, and they expect you to listen to them, and they expect you to react to them.
I thought that was only at home. I thought that was only, that's actually happening in corporate America.
Yes. And so, gosh, I love this question, because I actually haven't even thought about this. My mind's blown right now. So like anything, there needs to be a balance there, right? Because if you spend all your time sort of just letting your employees just sort of, be emotional, then, you're never getting any work done.
Can we just take a moment for that? I mean, I find that you're very cleverly explaining this, which I appreciate. And you're a mother of two, right?
Yep.
Two girls?
Two girls.
Okay. I have two girls also, and a boy. So we're relating to this. We're speaking on two different levels right now, because there's one thing that happens at home with the kids. I am so interested in how this shows up in the workplace. And you're saying
it shows up the same way often.
It does.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I mean, it just happened last night at dinner. My 15-year-old got very emotional about something, and they were like, okay, good, we're done with that. Now let's move on. And she couldn't.
Right.
It's time to move on from that, right? And sometimes that happens in the workplace, right? Even if you have a constructive conversation about something, that's tinged with emotion, sometimes people hang on to that, and it's hard to get them to focus and move on. So, that I think is the great struggle, right? If you are, a leader who's zeroed in on sort of EQ and having balance, you got to make sure that you have that balance, that you don't lean too far into we're all here to talk about our feelings every day, right? You have to balance that with, this is a business.
Yes.
And that is sometimes hard for the newer generations to understand, because they've maybe experienced a world in which there's a lot of latitude for emotional, sharing.
Do you have any advice for those people who are going in? So we're talking about kind of from our perspective, but what about those, I'm going to say kids.
Yeah.
What about that younger generation coming into the workplace to understand what is kind of acceptable and not acceptable?
Yeah.
How far they can push that line, or what they can. Used to be there's no crying in baseball, you know, and now it's kind of okay to cry at work.
Okay to cry for an hour, but not 8. Yeah. I think they need to know they need to know what they don't know. And so they need to sort of come into the situation very clear that they're there to learn that balance and watch for it, and then ask for it. And when they are given it, like, take it in and adjust sort of their behavior. I think that's the biggest, sort of need, is that sometimes I feel like, people are a little closed off to learning, because they come into careers thinking they kind of know how to behave. And actually, as much as coming into a business is learning the business, you're learning how to behave in the business. And so you got to be like humble and a sponge for that sort of behavior that's going to give you the best outcome. And the best outcome is that you're happy and you're contributing and you're progressing, right? Yeah. And so, and look, I would say ask for whoever's giving you feedback for feedback, not only on the work you're doing, but how you're getting the work done. And I always say that that's culture, by the way, how you get the work done. Culture is, what are the acceptable behaviors, right, in a company? And every company is different in terms of like the behaviors that are acceptable, but you need to understand those in context of the business, but you need to understand how effective you are, right? And so, I can think of situations like this where I'll think to myself, God, that employee, is doing great work. However, she or he could leave the extra, behind and be that much more successful. So I would ask for feedback that is both on how the work being done and how the work is being done.
Yeah, that's great advice. That is just great advice. And as far as being a female leader, advantage, disadvantages?
Yeah, it's a question I always get, of course.
It almost seems unfair. I want to go back to this for a second, because I really thought about this question hard. And do I ask her about being a female leader? Like, why do we have to pull that out? But I think we do. So I want you to know that it was conscious that I'm asking you as a female leader, because we still don't have parity. It's just not there.
Not even close.
We need people like you in those positions, and we need you still to talk about it. Yeah. So,
and I'm reminded of that every time somebody asks me, because inevitably somebody contacts me and says, "Oh my God, thank you so much," and I'm like blown away. I'm like, I'll do maybe, let's say, a Zoom or something and talk about, female leadership. And then afterwards I'll get contacted by people. I'm like, what? That mattered? I'm right. So you're exactly right. And that's maybe a lesson for me. And this question is that I had somebody one time say to me, you start off in your career and you're unconsciously incompetent, meaning you don't know what you don't know. And then by the time you're like maybe my age, which I feel is very old now, you're like, you're unconsciously competent, meaning you are unaware of what you know and you stop sharing it.
Correct.
You just know, it's just who you are.
Yeah.
And I have to remember that, because I think, well, everybody knows what I know and I have nothing new to say. Why do I have to say it again? But you're right.
Yeah.
People need to hear it again, and every perspective's interesting and potentially inspiring. So it's a great question, actually, and it's something I always should get asked and should always continue to focus on answering. And then here's sort of the tough part of how I always answer on the disadvantages. I haven't felt any disadvantages. I don't know if I've been lucky or it's happened and I've just not seen it and chosen to see it or acknowledged it. I am like a huge optimist, like huge. And so I couldn't tell
it all. I couldn't tell it all.
So, if somebody, believe me, I've had moments where people have been shitty to me in my life, but often,
I bet you've approached that with incredible optimism.
Exactly. I'm like, it goes back to the 700,000 hours. I'm like, I like my family is what's important and, my health. And I just sort of let things roll off my back. And so, disadvantages as a woman, like maybe I've been paid less. Sure, I probably have. We all know the wage gap. But like, I've been so fortunate that I don't really pay attention to that. I don't really let that weigh me down. I've never felt like I have been passed over for an opportunity or, discriminated in any way because I'm a woman. I've been incredibly lucky to have men, women, bosses, whatever, people just support me. And if anything, make an extra effort because I'm a woman to sort of, make me feel like I have a seat at the table. And I've also just, again, like, because I maybe have the blinders on, I just come in a situation like, well, I deserve this. I wouldn't even think of like why I wouldn't. And so that is sort of my advice, I guess, for women always is like, put yourself in the mindset of like, take all that doubt out. I mean, just erase it from your brain because it does you no good. And you got to just sort of put yourself in that mindset of like, I have an amazing life. I'm an amazing person and I'm here to contribute. And the noise, just put it aside. And if something's happening to you, just take yourself out of the situation. Just move on. There is no reason to stay anywhere, in my opinion, in life when you're unhappy. You just got to move on. And so the advantages, I guess, of being a woman, it goes back to, I think, definitely the, female leader is the EQ and just the freedom to be someone that is like a full self in terms of like, it goes back to the IQ, EQ thing. Like, I think men really struggle with like, they feel, I think, burdened by a persona that they're supposed to step into. And I think women, there is this sort of like burden around like the hard hitting female executive. But I just don't think that exists anymore, particularly in e-commerce, fashion, maybe in banking, or something it exists. Right. But I just think, that has been sort of shattered, that sort of persona for women. And so we get to sort of show up, I think, now and be our whole selves, where I think men still are, showing up like 50% of who they really are sometimes. Huh. I'm an optimist.
Okay.
So I know a lot of people probably wouldn't agree with that, but.
Well, let's go back to when you had children.
Yeah.
You were pregnant and working at Backcountry, and where were you with the second child?
Both at Backcountry.
Okay, both at Backcountry.
Yeah.
What'd you get for maternity leave?
I think I got 12 weeks, if I remember. I mean, it was interesting because my second child, I was a CEO, so I would have put the policy in place.
You would have put the policy in place.
And so I think I had 12 weeks in both cases, but I don't think I took it in either case. I mean, well, this is a funny thing. When I got pregnant with my first child, I had not. So I got called in to sort of the founder and CEO at the time. His office at Backcountry was told that I was being made CEO. And I think my reaction was, that's incredible. Thank you. By the way, I'm pregnant. And I had her 6 months after I became CEO. And the kind of a funny thing is I was on, like, we didn't have Slack back then. I don't know what internal, communications tool it was, but I think I messaged like whoever, I was on some sort of chat program with a bunch of employees and I was like, all right, it's launch time, gotta go. And I mean, I literally gave birth, like a minute after that. Like, it was just, work for me has always been so fun and not a job that like I didn't need to take 12 weeks. I was happy to come back sooner, but I think I was given 12 weeks.
But what about now? What's happening now in the workplace?
So I'll start at Tamara Mellon, then I'll talk about James Michelle. So at Tamara Mellon, we were, so it was almost the perfect opportunity to be as like pro women, pro like, I mean, that brand was all about and I hate to say it, but because it's such a loaded term now, but empowerment for women. And so, we were largely, I mean, I think at the peak when I was there, we were maybe 70 people and 60 were women, right? Or maybe even 62. But we had the most progressive benefits. I mean, we sponsored egg freezing. We had maternity and paternity benefits. We had, a mother's room. I mean, we basically anything and everything that we could do to make women feel like they could be a mother or be a mother today or someday, or have children. We did it. And we were proud of that. And I actually remember for a Mother's Day storytelling opportunity, we actually did a big promotion where we highlighted the best companies in the U.S. with the best and most progressive maternity benefits. And then we sort of adopted those. So that was, I think, that was a proud moment for both me and Tamara. James Michelle is a much, much, much smaller company. But it's interesting, this topic, because we had our first employee tell us like a week or two ago that she was pregnant. And we had no program in place. And so we said, okay, well, at this stage of business, what should we do? And we said, we'll give her 6 weeks. And by the way, for the men that work in the company, we'll extend the same paternal benefit to our male employees. And so that feels like a good place to start for a small company. I think the benefits should be commensurate with the size of the company. So that's just practical.
Isn't this airplane noise just great? I have to say, you never know with this podcast. Usually there are dogs, but the dogs are not here today. But the airplane showed up, and normally the window would be closed, but it's getting warm out, so opening the window.
It feels nice.
For people listening who get the airplane noise, you just never know what's going to come.
Yep.
I want to ask you about, so you talked about the benefits for women. What's your favorite part of this work now with the jewelry business? What's your favorite part of this?
That's a good question. I think it's working, because it's a smaller business, I think it's working much closer with the team, every team doing everything in the business, right? So as an example, just came from like a 2-day offsite, and I was with the design and sort of the content team, and we were going through what's happening for holiday, what's happening for Q4, and we were looking at every piece of jewelry and sort of thinking about how to put the jewelry together in groups, and then who was going to shoot that, and sort of what the story was going to be. And, at companies at different stages, what I might have had happen was a team present to me the output of that meeting. Whereas at this stage of business, I'm in it, and I am, taking notes, and I am contributing in a way that, is just really special in an early stage business.
How early are you now in this business?
Well, the business is actually quite old, but I joined a year ago. Private equity bought it a year ago, and they brought me in to help scale the business. But in terms of size, it's just, there are 35 employees, so Backcountry when I left had 1,200, let's say, and Tamara Mellon had, maybe at the peaks, like I said, it's about 70. So, it's a really small team. And by the way, I should be clear on that, of the 35 employees, 13 are jewelers, right? So the people, sort of doing other parts of the business, there's a handful, right? And so, I am working on inventory planning. I'm working on merchandising.
Right.
I'm working on every function of the business in a very hands-on way. And that is super fun.
That's super fun. So do you like the beginning of the business? Like this stage right now of the actual growth?
I do. I mean, I think the sweet spot is probably a little bigger for me, but, this is fun right now. And so much is about the people, the category, and the stage. And, it's the combination of all of that is made this business fun to work on.
So on the other side of that business are people like us who are listening to you right now. We're the consumers. What should we look for when we buy online?
Well, I think first and foremost is just amazing service.
Okay.
Like, And look, sometimes you don't know that until you've bought something and then you have a problem.
Right.
And by the way, I mean, I think this is like, if I think about James Michelle, this is something we're continuing to work on. And something that I'm really trying to instill, right, is this idea that we should do everything and anything to make our customers happy. There's just too many options out there for her. So I think, you should be treated, you should come away from a situation where you needed something from a brand going, wow, like I didn't expect them to do that. That feels really good.
Okay.
And so then maybe to talk about that, ahead of like maybe a return, let's say, or an exchange or an issue, I think you should feel the same thing when you experience the product and the online experience. So often what I say in e-commerce is you have two products. You have a physical product you're selling, and then you have the digital product. And that in itself, that experience, it's driven by software development, right? It is a product. And so I think there has to be little moments, either in the both in the physical product and in the digital product, that make you feel like they did something a little special. They went, and it has to feel like, again, it has to feel like there's an intelligence in the articulation of the product and the brand. And then there has to, I think, feel something emotional. And I think you should feel both. You should feel like this company is smart in the way they're getting this to me and delivering this. And then it's got to make you feel, I think, special.
Yeah. And on your end of it, is success when someone comes back?
Oh, absolutely.
Is that
or even more importantly, tell somebody about the brand. I mean, that actually is probably the most important for me. Is somebody I was in Park City last week, and I was at a little farmer's market, and I went up to a candle vendor. And I noticed the woman had on a James Michelle ring.
Oh.
And so I said, "Oh, I love your ring." I'm like, I said something like, "I love your ring." And she goes, "Oh, it's James Michelle. Oh my God, it's such a great brand." And she just went off. And I was like, oh my God. I was like, wait, let me take my phone out and video this, right?
Yeah.
Because I was like, that is what I want. I want somebody's face to light up.
Right.
And to be so excited about the brand that ideally, they're sitting down with their friends and family and, without being prompted or sharing their experience. But if somebody asks, I always feel that with Backcountry. Whenever I say I was once the CEO of Backcountry, inevitably people are like, "Oh my God, I love that brand."
Yeah.
And that,
what a
for
good
me,
feeling.
is just, yeah.
You mentioned that you work a lot. Well, that's obvious. Very passionate about it. But, maternity leave, you came back quickly, or you didn't go until the last moment. How do you achieve work-life balance? Now you have 2 children. You got to be a good example, right?
Yeah.
And you have to be spending time with your children. So what do you do for fun, or how do you get that in?
Yeah. So first of all, I just try to be, and again, this isn't, you've all probably heard this before, but I try to be just very focused on either work or my family, right? And look, I break those rules all the time. I mean, I was yesterday in my offsite. My daughter called, and I obviously took the call, right? Or I'll be, at home having dinner, and my phone will ding. But I really try not to do that. And so I try to take vacations where I disconnect. And then when I'm at work, I really try to just focus, on work. And if that means I have 7 hours of work, I would rather do that than feel like I'm punching the clock in 8 hours and distracted.
Right.
And I try to carve out time for both and be very deliberate and intentional about that. And I really value my personal time. I think I used to think that, working harder was, I once had somebody say, you'll never be the smartest person in the room, but you can outwork people. And I was like, oh, I'm on that. I can do that. And that is true, to some degree, that grit and that commitment and that passion and working hard. But I don't think you have to do that all the time. And I think you can work smart. So I think it's figuring out those times to work hard and work smart, and then the old play hard, and disconnect. And I'm very thoughtful about that. And and I feel good, by the way, when I have an episode of working very smart, I allow myself then to have a break and enjoy that break.
What about your own self-care, though? You're talking about taking care of your family. You're not really talking about you taking care of yourself. Do you have time for that?
You know, I always feel guilty about this because I don't do that, but I don't think I need to. That is my self-care.
Right.
I
That's part
feel
of
like
it.
I'm lucky to have a family, be a working mom, and be a working mom.
Yeah.
Like, as weird as that is, I'm gonna flip that on its head. Like, self-care is that I get to have this amazing career, my board work, my day job, and then I feel like I'm lucky enough to have a job where I can go and, I'm going to Spain next week. I'm taking my parents and my kids, and I'm going to disconnect. I'm going to take a break.
Really? You really disconnect? You really?
I mean,
Wow.
I'll check. I'll look at email, but that's self-care. I enjoy it. I want to know what's going on.
Right.
My definition of self-care is not that I need to go have a massage or whatever. I play tennis.
Yeah,
yes,
you got
I'll
it.
go play tennis when I
Yes,
want to,
yes.
But I'm doing what I love, and so I don't need anything else.
Aw, good for you. Anything I didn't ask you about that you want to mention? You talked about being fearless. So maybe that is something I would love to hear your voice on. For
Okay.
people coming out now, even whether or not you're starting your career now or you're starting phase 2 of your career, you're starting a podcast, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
I love what you talk about.
Yeah.
Fearlessness.
Yeah.
Please.
So
Give us your wisdom.
I will. One of the founders of Backcountry, John Brzee, who was, super influential in my life and just a really incredible human being, once said to me, I feel like I have a lot of great quotes from working for him early days at Backcountry. He said to me, he said, Jill, he said, the risky way is the safe way, and the safe way is the risky way. Wait, did I say both
say
of
that
those?
again? Let's do that again.
The risky way is the safe way, and the safe way is the risky way. So if you play it safe, you're taking all the risk. But if you're taking risks, it's the safe path, meaning it's the better path. Meaning, like, if you don't take risks, you're sort of like, you're sort of not doing anything and achieving anything. And like, if you want the best outcome in your life, then really risk taking is, an imperative. And so, you kind of have to like sit back and think about that. Like, so if you play it safe, it's kind of risky because you're never going to really find maybe the great big unlock or the thing that's going to make you truly happy. And so I've taken a lot of risks, and sure enough, what has resulted is, I think a great outcome in my life. And so, it's sort of paved the way, I guess, for, sort of this life I've led, this risk taking. And by the way, I don't mean like risk, like, I've done these like crazy things, but I've done things that have been a bit uncomfortable, or things that I thought I couldn't do, or I didn't know how to do, or, didn't all make sense. I just sort of said, I'll figure it out. And sure enough, then, largely it's just made me a more complete person, and I've learned things, and it's sort of opened doors for me. So it's sort of a play on like, risk is actually the safe path.
So fearlessness to you is take those risks.
That's right.
Even when you're not ready.
That's right.
That's not a very female trait, right? What tends to happen is if a man and a woman are offered a job, the woman will say, I'm not really ready for it yet. The man will say, I'll figure it out. You're saying, just lean into that.
Yeah.
That's not a male-female thing. Just be fearless, and you will figure it out when you get into it.
Yeah. I mean, just trust yourself. I mean, and maybe what unlocked that for me was being given a huge opportunity so early in my career, right? So I didn't go to Backcountry and be like, I'm going to be CEO someday. I mean, the fact that I became a CEO at 36, right? And had never been one. It was like a $200 million company when I took it over. I mean, I had no idea what it meant to be a CEO or how to be a CEO, but I was, given this incredible opportunity, and I thought to myself, well, I'm not going to say no. And so maybe it was that initial leap, that opportunity, so I think I was just incredibly fortunate that I had that. And so that sort of then set me on the path of like, okay, well, that worked.
Yeah.
I'll keep going.
Yeah, let's try that again.
Yeah.
So that's fearlessness. There was one question I had for you. I said,
Yeah.
anything I didn't ask you, but I want to ask you about the conversational AI company.
Ah, yes, LivePerson. Yeah.
What is that all about?
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier at Backcountry, we'd sort of built this brand around this idea of expert gearhead connections. And one of our technology partners in doing this back in 2004 was a company called LivePerson. And LivePerson was and I'll explain how it's evolved, was a leader in the chat space back then, 2004. So what I mean by chat is you're on a website, the little icon pops up and says need any help, and you chat into somebody and they help you through the experience, right? And in 2004, that was largely what was synchronous web-based communication, right? Chat conversation between a brand and a consumer. And so that was one of the ways we provided one-to-one gearhead expertise, is that, somebody would come to Backcountry.com, a little thing would pop up and say chat with a gearhead, and you'd actually say, oh, hi, I need help with my skis. And by the way, back then, it was pretty novel. I mean, today, it's everywhere,
everywhere,
right?
Yeah.
So LivePerson was our partner, and really, we did a lot of very innovative stuff in the chat space. When I left Backcountry, the founder and CEO, chairman of LivePerson, Rob Locascio, approached me and said, hey, would you want to join the LivePerson board? We've done a lot with you as the CEO of Backcountry to innovate within the chat space, and we've done some pretty transformational stuff, and we'd love to have like a voice of the customer on the board and really somebody that understands the consumer point of view as it relates to this technology. I said, great, yes. I'd never been a board member of a public company.
But you're going to figure it out.
I want to figure it out. But it was a great honor, and I love the company, love the technology, and so I joined the board, and I've been on the board almost 7 years now, and the company transformed once in 2018 to asynchronous messaging. So chat evolved to be more than just a web-based synchronous chat, to the ability to have web-based conversations that are asynchronous. So you can come back to the conversation, as well as LivePerson began powering the conversations between brands and consumers in other sort of channels, right? So through Apple Business Chat, through WhatsApp for Business, through SMS. And again, all sort of where in 2004, when you would be talking, through chat, if you close the web browser, you're done, right? These conversations in an asynchronous messaging environment, you can come back to the conversation at any time. Okay. So that was sort of a big evolution. And then more recently, and why it's described now as a conversational AI company, is automation's been put on top of all of this messaging, right? And so these conversations that are happening between brands and consumers, the biggest brands in the world, Delta Airlines, Home Depot, are being powered not only by humans, but also by automation. You could refer to that as bots, but it's more than just bots. And now with the evolution of like ChatGPT and large language models, the data that exists between consumers and brands is being used to automate those conversations more intelligently, so that the service that a consumer can get from a brand through asynchronous messaging is more intelligent when it's being served by automation.
So no more frustration. I can't tell you how many times, right, you type in and you're like, that's not my question. And I go back.
Right.
So we're working on that.
The big unlock is going to be, again, these large language models that are powering things like ChatGPT. Like, there is lots of data out there that is going to feed these models and make, particularly in the space of like consumer to brand communication, it's going to make it more accurate, more powerful, more intelligent.
Yeah, that would be amazing if that could work for the airline. When you have to call the airline, you wait. Now it's, would you like us to call you back? The wait time is 2 hours and 55 minutes.
Well, and actually Delta now will drop you into, Delta's a LivePerson customer, will drop you into messaging. They'll say, do you want to move to SMS, right?
Yeah.
And so you can move to that conversation, and you can actually then, in an asynchronous environment, so you could say, my bag's lost, right? And you might have a human agent respond to you. And let's say you got to go make dinner. You could come back to that conversation. Oh, thank you for that. And then maybe you have another question. The answer will come back. Now, the problem with from a business perspective, Delta, you think about all the human agents that would have to power those conversations. Ideally, you'll put some automation on that, on top of that, to make, frankly, you could scale that service. But it's happening, and it's coming, and it's just going to get more and more accurate and timely, and the speed is gonna change consumers' lives, because no one wants to wait on hold on an 800 number, right?
Right.
Nobody wants to wait for a call back, right? And we sort of want answers on our time, right? We want it when we want it. We want a response from a brand, but sometimes we get interrupted and we need to come back to the conversation, right? So yeah, I think the way we communicate, with friends and family, right? Brands and consumers are increasingly going to communicate the same way.
Right, because everything we do is so fast. We get a response right away. It's like when you text someone and they don't text right back. Exactly. What's going on over there?
Exactly.
Didn't they hear me?
Exactly. Yep.
Right. Jill, amazing. What's next for you?
I think more of the same. I'm going to continue to, I love the balance of sort of the board work and, what I call my day job running James Michelle. I like the hands-on work I'm doing with the team now. And so I think it's going to be stay focused on building a great culture, building a great brand, and storytelling, motivating the team. And then, this board work that frankly exposes me to completely different, scale of business and world. And I think that keeps me sort of always learning, like I said. And, I am definitely a learn-it-all. I love learning new things. And everything I'm doing right now, I'm learning a ton.
Amazing. Jill Layfield, serial CEO. Can I call you that? Serial CEO. Thank you for being a trailblazer for women and for just all of us, an inspiration.
Thank you.